Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. All right, today Philip Frey returns to the show. Philip, he's the host of the podcast Valiant Growth and a good friend of mine. And we're going to talk about something that I find very exciting, and that is a hitchhiking trip he did across Europe a few years back. So he covered 10 countries in 40 days on, I think he said $250. So pretty amazing. So we're going to get into that, the frugality, what were his methods of, traveling Europe on a very tight budget. We're going to talk about stepping out of your comfort zone, and relying on your own ingenuity. We're going to look at the ins and outs of couch surfing, hitchhiking, networking. How does networking factor into all of this? And talk about, relying on the kindness of strangers and, a nice positive message that Philip has for the whole human race going forward out of that one. So before we get to the interview, I just wanted to let you know that there is bonus content available for Choice Conversations on Patreon. So if you go to patreon.com/choiceconversations, there you will find bonus content. You just sign up and you can have access to that. And I will have a link to that in the show notes. All right, here's the show. Philip, welcome back.
Hey, Chris. Nice to be back on Choice Conversations.
Yeah. So I know, longtime listeners of Choice Conversations are pretty familiar with your work, but if this is their first time checking into Choice Conversations, you're wondering who this guy is I'm talking to, why don't you take a minute and just introduce yourself?
So Valiant Growth is a personal development podcast, and I'm the host. I talk about things like personal finance, productivity, relationships, anything that can really help make your life better. That's actionable. It's very similar to Choice Conversations in that way, except I do probably more solo episodes. And also I've recently been experimenting with turning the website into a blog. So if any of your listeners want to give it a shot, they can just read through an article, see if they like it before committing to a whole episode.
Sure. Yeah, so me and you, we've been friends. It feels like we've been friends for a long time. I guess because we hit it off so well right away, and we have these deep conversations, and I just feel like I know you so well. But when I look back on it, I guess we've only been friends for a few months now. But it feels like it's been forever.
Yeah, it was.
In a good way.
6 months, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, in a good way, it feels like it's been forever. But I'm sitting there and I'm listening to a Radical Personal Finance, this podcast, and you're a guest on the show, and you're talking about how you did this hitchhiking trip across Europe that I had no idea about. And I was just blown away. I was like, "Oh my God!" It was, some of the stuff, and we'll get into the details in a little bit here. But some of it was pretty radical, like how you were able to do it on such a low budget and that sort of thing. So I wanted to have you on today to talk about that because for my own personal fascination, I was like, "Wow, that is really cool. That is quite the adventure." And also, I just think it helps to underscore a lesson to the listeners that if you're letting money hold you back, certainly there are some things in life that you're not going to be able to do without money, but there's so many things you can do in life with no money or very little money. You just have to put your mind to it, I guess. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Sound good? Are you excited to talk about that?
Oh yeah, this is my favorite story to tell. So yeah.
I can imagine. It is quite the story to tell. All right. So started off by telling me, when this idea started to form in your mind, what was the attraction? Were you thinking, how can I afford this? I guess, what was the genesis?
This is the genesis to this was a conversation with a friend / roommate back in university, and we did actually go together in the end. So it was summer, and it was his idea. He was thinking about how could I travel without spending any money, because it was the kind of guy that liked to really get by on very little and make his money go a long way. I wasn't like that at the moment, at the time, but he was, and he was also a risk taker. He was a pretty experimental guy. Anyway, he tells me that he's thinking about this. One afternoon we're just relaxing, and we get into this conversation about ideas of how it could be done, but it was all theoretical. At the time, it was like a brainstorming session. We talked about it. It was interesting, and then we forgot. And that was in fact, we didn't know, but that was the prelude to the whole hitchhiking story.
Okay, so you guys had this conversation, theoretical brainstorming session, and then when did that start to turn into, hey, we could really do this?
So this turned into reality when we went to a kind of youth camp in a different country. So we were living in Romania at the time, and there was in a almost neighboring country of Slovakia, there was this kind of event organized, a 1-week event, and we went there and we were enjoying it. But kind of in the middle of the event, my friend says, hey, how about we visit Austria as well, which would be then another, like more to the west, the next neighboring country. And I asked him, like, how are we going to do that? And he says, well, you remember our talk? Like maybe we could hitchhike there, maybe we could do some couch surfing. I'm like, you know what? I guess we could do that. At the time, he was, for the reasons don't matter that much, but we had some time. I had just quit college, and he was waiting for something to happen. So we had the time. So we said, okay, let's give this a shot. And then it ballooned out of control, because we got there and we said, this, if we got this far, maybe we could go, a little bit further. Maybe we could go to Germany. And then from there, in the end, we ended up going for about 45 days and got as far as Paris.
Wow. All right. And so you hadn't actually prepped ahead of time. So no. I'm guessing, at some point you need some kind of gear or whatever. Did you, what did you start off with just on this trip in Slovakia, and what did you need to add to that quickly so that you were ready to hitchhike across Europe?
Yeah, we kind of added everything that we needed as it became a problem. But we were prepared for a 1 week trip. So we had some clothes and backpack, the handbag, and so when you go for a 1 week trip, you're usually kind of prepared. So we had most of the things that we need. I think actually the bigger problem was that on my end, I had way too many clothes, both for the 1 week and for the hitchhiking trip. So the first 2 weeks were kind of constant back pain because of the weight on my back, and then the muscle got used to it. But after that, we added in small things. So for instance, I got some sewing equipment, kind of hand fixing my clothes, and my backpack became a necessity. And we got the papers for hitchhiking, the papers, the markers. But overall, we kind of kept going with what we had on hand. I had brought my tablet at the time, and that became our navigation tool. and then we just used what was in our packs.
Right. And you say papers, that's like to write a sign, yes. Traveling to Paris, please give us a ride kind of thing?
Yeah, I'd say it was that simple. We bought a stack of papers and some markers, and really that's the main tool of hitchhiking.
High tech. All right.
Yeah.
So, how hitchhiking is something that at least people I talk to, that they're like, oh, that's so dangerous. I would never hitchhike, And I think it's almost people are more afraid of picking up hitchhikers, that you might pick up someone dangerous, but also even just hitchhiking yourself. You're getting in some vehicle and, the world may never see you again once you get into that vehicle. I guess what was your thinking about hitchhiking when you started this? Did you have that same kind of fear? Or is that just something crazy that as an American over here I've developed that's, maybe it wasn't something you ever have had experience with? And then, I guess, how did your opinion change? So my question is, how did you feel about hitchhiking before you started this, and how did it change as you started doing it and experiencing it?
Yeah, so I was not a fan of hitchhiking before this started. I had seen it. In Romania, it's more prevalent than in other countries that I've been to. So in other countries in Europe, I think it's a little bit more. In Eastern Europe in general, you can see more of it than in Western Europe or the US. But I know that I personally wasn't a fan of it. I didn't like doing it. I guess I was a little bit scared of it. I was also that kind of soliciting on the side of the road. It's just, it's a form of salesmanship, sure. I think. And I didn't like that. That made me uncomfortable. The good news was that my friend had some experience. So he was the one who he would stand usually with the sign at the beginning, and I was more of a grumpy fellow traveler until I got used to it. But as I did it over and over again, it's because it was our main means of transportation throughout this trip. I really got used to it, and I started that discomfort disappeared. I think, as with many other things, you start doing it and you get used to it. And that's it. And that discomfort disappeared. I've seen that the people who were picking us up were not only not dangerous, but almost all of the time, usually exceptional and very kind and interesting people. And I started to appreciate that, and I started to appreciate the fact that this was in some ways superior to, say, taking the train or taking the car, because of this aspect of talking to people, getting stories, getting new experiences. And I've slowly became a big fan of it. And I didn't hitchhike a lot after this burst for a long time, but now that I'm back in the UK, I started doing it again, and I've come to the point where even though years have passed, I could just pick the sign up and I feel very comfortable, and I even enjoy it. I'm smiling to the drivers, cracking jokes at the cyclists who are passing by, Yeah, I've really come to enjoy it. And since almost without fail, the person who picks you up, it's kind of a subculture. There will be members of a subculture. So the hitchhiking is not mainstream. It used to be more mainstream. It's not mainstream anymore. So the people who will pick you up typically, and the people who will be picked up, have this thing in common. And they're often travelers who have done the same thing on a trip, or they were young, they did this, now they're well off, they have a nice car, but they remember their own experiences and they want to pick you up, partly because they see themselves in you, and partly because there's always a good story that you can expect out of this. And I can talk more about this, but just the level of kindness that you can expect is it's surprising, I will say.
Nice. Yeah, and I imagine that's got to that experience of meeting complete strangers and having that, like, random acts of kindness, that's got to give you hope for humanity, I imagine, or really improve your outlook for the race.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best things that, the best ways of getting that is just depending on the kindness of strangers in general. And you will often see that it's underestimated most of the time. And as far as the danger goes, that's overestimated too, how dangerous it is. There's, bad things can happen, but when you talk to dozens of people and nobody has had a bad experience, it starts to, and you don't have a bad experience, it starts to melt away.
So did you have any kind of techniques to minimize the risk? Like, is there like the warning sign to watch out for, or there really was no risk that you saw?
Yeah, there was really no risk that we saw. I mean, I guess if the driver would seem really, really suspicious, then we wouldn't get in, but that didn't really happen as we hitchhiked. There were some stranger people, but nobody that I would really feel in danger with.
Well, and probably the people that would be dangerous would be very friendly. Yeah, it's like, I think it was, what was it, Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer? Anyways, people just talked about what a nice guy he was. He was just so personable, and that was how they, he was being a successful predator to lure people in, get their defenses down, kind of thing. But I digress. We don't want to go down that path. We're talking about the hope for humanity here right now. And those are the I don't know. They're very uncommon. Right. Yeah. It gets all the press, so that's what people think about. But somebody being kind to a stranger is not a headline story, right? Even though that happens, millions of times a day.
Yeah, well, we're making it a headline story now.
Yeah. Now that it's on Choice Conversations, it's hit the big time. So, especially a show when I've got a heavy hitter like you on, this might as well be, ABC right here. All right. So, while we're talking about hitchhiking, what's one of your like favorite stories you had of getting in a car with somebody hitchhiking?
There are many stories with kind of many different angles. I've never been asked this question, actually. But I think the best experience was when we were in Germany, and Germany overall was very enjoyable to hitchhike in, and the people were exceptionally nice there. But a couple picked us up from going from Munich to Berlin. And we had a great talk. They were they're working in renewable energy and recharging electric cars, setting up points. This was a few years ago, so it was pretty cutting edge, more cutting edge than it is today. And so we had a great conversation, but when they were about to drop us off, they gave us, the guy gave us his business card, and he said, okay, if you run into any troubles or you need some help, just, contact me. And we took it, but you don't really expect this, to happen or to be real. Well, it turns out we got couch surfing. We found a place to stay, but after 2 days, we were, that was it. We couldn't stay anymore, and we were just looking for a hostel, and we were having a lot of troubles, and it was pretty late at night. And then we said, hey, we have this business card. Let's call this guy. And we called the guy, and he just said, okay, come over and you can stay with us. And they gave us a room. They gave us food. They helped us out with advice, and we spent a few days there, and that was just really nice. So we really were not expecting someone who just picked us up would even, invite us to their home, and that helped a lot. And especially in a big city like Berlin, People don't tend to be trusting, but yeah, this is the counterexample, and it was a really welcome break in a dire situation.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the logistics here. So you started off in Slovakia, and I guess you started in Romania, went to Slovakia, and from there, I guess how many cities or countries did you hit? How long did it take? What time of year? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So we went through 10 countries in Europe, and we didn't hurry too much, so we stayed as long as we could in kind of the major cities that we came across. And so it took us 40 to 45 days, the whole trip. We flew back in the end. We were a little bit worn out, but that was the length. And the time was very unfortunate. It was late October, early November, and we were in what is pretty northern Europe after the early phase. So it was cold, it was windy, it was rainy around the coast as well a lot. So yeah, that's how it happened.
All right. And how long did you say you were on for?
40 days.
40 days. All right. Right. And so were you primarily for lodging, you did couch surfing?
Yes. We did couch surfing, but the problem with our couch surfing was that we were novices in it, and we were not prepared, and that we ran into troubles insofar as finding places at times. So sometimes we did find places, and sometimes we didn't find places. And when we didn't find places, that's where the more interesting things happened, where we had slept in train stations, we had slept in bus stations, we had spent some 1 or 2 nights out in the street. We often, sometimes somebody would pick us up. We'd talk for half an hour and then we'd fall asleep. So, yeah.
And so I guess what mistakes were you making so that you ended up not having a couch to sleep on?
Yeah, so the mistakes that we were making were, well, the biggest mistake was that we were too late. We were too late, and we were always trying to book ahead. It was, as I said, it was a completely unplanned journey, and it was like, okay, let's get to the next city. Like we'd arrive somewhere, and then we'd decide where we'd go next. And from our experience, you need a little bit of time to book ahead. And when it's like, oh, I'm coming tomorrow, it's very hard to find, or even in 2 or 3 days, it's much harder to find a couch. And I'll just say, if for your listeners who are unfamiliar, Couchsurfing is a website where you offer up your couch for strangers to sleep on, basically. And there's a reputation system going along with that, and you find people who are offering it up too. So that's Couchsurfing. And the other mistake that we made was that there are some cities and time combinations where it's just not possible, and it would have been wise to avoid those cities or only visit them for a day. So for instance, something like Amsterdam on the weekend is absurd. Right? It's just not going to happen, finding a couch there. It's so much demand for it. So those were the 2 mistakes I think we made, and because of that, it only covered 50% of our nights. And we did sleep in some kind of cheap hostels for 2 or 3 nights, but even that was beyond our budget, so we didn't do that too often. Right. So speaking of budget, what did your budget look like on this? I mean, couch surfing is obviously free, hitchhiking is free, but there's food, there's the times when you can't find a couch and you're just staying at a hostel, and so what were your expenses? What did your budget look like? Yeah, so our budget was simply the the Romanian student budget, which without without accommodation. So for me, it was $200 per month, essentially. So a little bit to, I don't know, 250, 300 for the whole 40-day trip. And for my friend, it was a little bit lower than that, but something like along those lines. So it was very, very shoestring, especially once we got to Western Europe. And yeah, I can go into more detail on what we did there.
Right. So like, what did, hitchhiking? Okay. I got it. Couch surfing. Got it. What about food? All right. What about, you said like a tablet was an integral part of your navigation. And I'm assuming for your booking, couch surfing and all of that as well. What did you do to like keep it charged up? And I guess there's probably a lot of open Wi-Fi spots in Europe. So that's maybe not an issue, but, talk about some of those things.
Yeah. So when it came to food, we just bought fruit from supermarkets, generally things that you can, when we were not living somewhere in a place that had a kitchen, we would just buy things that you can eat very easily on a park bench or something like that. So, bread related things, biscuits and dairy, sliced meat, some fruits, things like that. And when we had access to kitchens, which was with hostels and couchsurfing you do, then we'd buy basic cooking ingredients. And that's also part of the couchsurfing experience, that you cook your foods from home and then they cook theirs and you swap out and you do that. So that was food. It wasn't expensive. We didn't go to restaurants. We didn't go to pubs. We did nothing of that. It was completely outside of our budget. So that would just sunk us completely. So that was food. When it came to navigation and the internet, we had no internet connection on the phone or on the tablet, but we didn't need it with open Wi-Fi spots. And I think many people don't realize the fact that if you have offline maps on your phone or on a device, GPS works on, GPS is free, basically. So if you got the map and you have your location on it, the only thing missing if you don't have internet is used to miss at the time. It's not the case anymore, but you wouldn't get routes calculated for you, but that was about it. And now you get that too. So you don't really need roaming internet or anything like that to navigate. So we did that. We usually charged it. That was a big part of our it was always a challenge. Like, okay, how are we going to charge it? But we got very good at spotting, basically sockets in the walls wherever we would go. So they were in train stations. They were in, and McDonald's was our ally often, or places like that. We'd go and charge there. We would always make sure to get things charged before we left, our hosts' homes. And it was a little bit harder back then because this was 3.5 years ago, and battery capacity was weaker at the time. But we made it work, and then we'd get our bearings, even turn off the tablet to preserve energy, and it kind of worked like that. We had a few more interesting solutions too, where sometimes we'd find food in McDonald's. Like some places you have these trays where people put their leftovers, and we'd kind of hunt those trays down and eat the fries or things like that. One time when we had a cash flow problem, and we begged for a few hours, and we got quite a lot of money that we could use to buy food and keep going.
Wow.
But I think all of these were exciting, interesting, fun, I would say, but pretty unnecessary. We could have done without them. So every time I tell this story, I always think of the listener and their mind is shutting off, like, oh, I'm not going to do this if I have to pick up other people's fries in McDonald's. Well, you don't have to do that. That was just we enjoyed it. So that's why we did it. And yeah, we didn't have many other costs. Like sometimes we would find with, you'd have these automatic ticket scanning in some places where the gate would open up. Sometimes we'd find discarded tickets. We would know, like, okay, this is the exit to the museum. The first trash can on the way is going to, in and around the trash can, you're going to have these tickets. That's guaranteed. So we would just, we would find that, and they'd be valid for, 3 hours. So we'd just get the ticket, go in. So we did things like that too. And yeah, we tried to save money in any way possible since we had so little of it. And it worked. It was very, very exciting, much more interesting than a regular trip.
Yeah, I'll bet. I mean, it really is an adventure that, most people never have something of this, of this ilk, this kind of excitement, this kind of, I guess part of it is putting yourself at risk and putting yourself in a situation where you don't know what's coming next and you're relying on your own ingenuity to take care of yourself, which is not a situation most people are in for an extended period of time. So yeah, it's definitely pretty interesting. So, I mean, would you say that before this trip you had a lot of experience with things like that, of stepping out of your comfort zone? Or was this the first where you really had anything remotely close to that?
Yeah, this was absolutely, for me, a trial by fire type situation. I did so many things I would have never have imagined, and, maybe would have looked down in disdain. There's a pretty middle class upbringing in Romania. So a lot of these things I would scoff at before. And I would, it would feel alien and weird and uncomfortable. But when you're in the situation, you're just trying to survive, and it works out that way. So the part of you says, okay, let's go. And then the other part gets there and has to figure out what to do, and you figure it out. But over time, as we were gaining mastery, it went from being this uncomfortable, kind of scary thing, yucky thing almost. It went from that to being something that we just took pleasure in, like what other solutions we can find. And I think that was such a formative experience for me. I'm into a lot of interesting frugality things with Valiant Growth. There's people that follow me know these things. Well, this is where it all started. And that feeling of, I know, Chris, I'm sure you've had this too, but when you're in a tough situation and there's no easy way out, you have to really engage and your brain comes alive. And this was 40 days of just being really engaged and being really in this kind of flow type situation where it was challenge, but it was always a challenge that you could overcome. And it was really an amazing experience because of that.
Yeah, and I'd say you were very lucky to have the friend you had who was comfortable with some of these things, like hitchhiking. And it sounds like had you not had him there, this probably would have never happened. Is it safe to say that? Yeah,
he gave me a lot of the courage and some of the know-how. And it's more fun when you're doing something completely new and weird with somebody else, with a friend. So yeah, that helped a lot. Having somebody more experienced and kind of more flexible it wouldn't have happened without that. Not with my mindset before this trip, for sure.
Right. I mean, that's a bond that you'll have with this person for forever. I mean, is he still in your life?
Unfortunately, he isn't at the moment, but that's partly because of my move. But yeah, it deepened our relationship at the time. And, it was it's a bond. It's a bond. And yeah, that's all I've got on that.
Right. So as you were on this trip and it's winding down and it's close, you're nearing the time to go home. What were you feeling at that point?
Well, it was two things. Partly there was relief because we essentially could have gone on for a long time, and it was a unique situation like that at the time. But we were, the hardships that arose from the fact that it was a bad time. It was cold, it was raining, it was windy, our inexperience, that it kind of started to add up. And though we were learning fast, the fatigue was building up. And, when we didn't find a place to sleep again, it was the third night where there was no place to sleep. There was a breaking point there. But on the other hand, there was this great sadness. There's this great sadness in me for sure, because I didn't know if I would ever come back to doing anything like this. And I enjoyed it so much despite the hardships and this feeling of aliveness. I didn't know if, how long it would take to come back to Western Europe too. I really enjoyed being there. And now I'm in the United Kingdom, but at the time it seemed, moving somewhere seemed like a much more insurmountable experience than now I know that it is. So I was sad. I was happy to have had the experience. I was also, let's say, the third emotion was pride. We felt a lot of pride. We knew nobody at the time who did anything like this. Turns out there are a good number of people who have their own stories of this kind, but it's a subculture and you just don't know about it. So it was a mixture of emotions.
Wow. And how do you feel about it now when you look back at it?
I'm very happy to have done it. It was just an amazing experience, and having these years to see its impact, I think it has really, really shaped me in a very positive way and made me much, much more resilient. It was kind of a stoic experiment at a time where I wasn't familiar that's a thing where you live below your means and in an uncomfortable situation, so that in the future when you're enjoying a better life, A, you can appreciate it, and B, that I know that whatever happens, I can absolutely survive on the street. And that really broadens the amount of risk that I'm willing to take. And that's paid off very well. So overall, I'm very happy for this trip. I'm very happy to have taken it. I am proud of our accomplishment. And it's just, it's all good emotions.
Right. Yeah. And well, like you said, you can cut your expenses and make your expenses very low. And then you said that you did actually quite well in a few hours of just begging. If worst case scenario, you could just beg. Yeah. And, do you remember like how much money did you make in an afternoon of begging?
We made, let's see, in dollars, something like $17, $18 in an hour.
Mm-hmm. And how much? Yeah, that's like, I think, double minimum wage here in the States. And that was the two of you together, or just in you individually? It
was just one of us. It was actually my friend. It was a bridge too far for me. Oh, gotcha. I was more like the lookout guy, Gotcha. If there's any trouble happening.
And your food budget for a day was typically like what?
It's something like $2 or $3, maybe $4, something like that.
Wow. So yeah, it sounds like 1 hour of begging, depending on, I'm sure begging is like hit or miss depending on where you're located. Some days you do better than others, but in 1 hour you can get, a few days of food, and that's your primary expense. So yeah, you could definitely survive on the street if something, worst came to worst. It's not hard to get by. You might be, a tramp or something like that, but you're not going to die.
Yes. And that's very empowering. And I think that's true for anybody. If you're put into that situation, you figure it out. And begging is just one option. There there are many other legal and ethical ways of making some money. And
sure.
You can work some if you need to. So there are other options too. You can sell things. Right. But I think anybody can do it. But the thing is, you don't really realize it, I think. And that limits many people in their capacity to take risks. You don't know how low you can go and still survive, maybe even enjoy your life. And yeah.
And if you were to do it over again, what would you do differently?
Book rooms in advance. That's very important. I've since expanded my network, and that would help a lot. So maybe I would spend a little bit more time networking before I go on a trip like this. A few times we had stayed with people that my friend knew from before, from other places. He was also a very good networking kind of guy. And, I mean, that's better than couch surfing too in some ways. So I would work on that, make sure that I'm going to places where I know people, will let me, stay with them for a few days. Another thing is packing strategically. That's just something I knew nothing about. I would definitely go very minimalist this time and really look at every single item and very, very carefully decide if I need this item, because every item adds to the weight, and weight, it makes the whole thing very uncomfortable if you have a huge thing on your back. I would go in a different season. That season was just a poor choice at the time. And I think that's it. I think otherwise I'd probably do the same. We've learned some tools along the way, and I would use them, but yeah, other than that.
Right. And so let's see, I'm doing the math here. You said you had $200, $300 for 40 days?
Yes.
So what does that equal out to a day?
$7
a day?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. All right. Yeah. Wow. So I know if you say you want to travel, but you can't afford it, can you afford $7 a day? So yeah. So I guess for you, what would you say would be the big takeaway for the listeners from your trip?
I think the takeaway is that with creativity and with the capacity to go a little bit out of your comfort zone, you can afford anything. I think I get this. I get this. I find this in many fields, but definitely in travel, it's you name your own price almost. If you're flexible, if you're willing to learn, you name your own price. If you want to do something, including travel, you can find a way on any budget. I think that's one takeaway. And if you'll permit me another one, I think it's also worth doing things, going through things in a little bit of an uncomfortable way, just because of all the benefits that you get from it. It's fun to be uncomfortable, and it makes you more resilient. And those are both very valuable. So I might even advocate for cutting a bit of your budget, even if you could afford it, just to experience these things in life.
Right. And for people like us that are podcasters and we have fans, what an opportunity to get out and to meet your fans. Like you said, if you were to do it now, you have a wider network. I know if I was going to do this, I would definitely be, reaching out to my fan base and being like, hey, I'm going to be passing through this area. If you're around and want to meet up, we can meet up for a coffee, or we'd meet up for a walk in the park together, or if you got a couch for me to stay on, even better, kind of thing. And, that would just be really, really neat. And just, it's neat enough to just meet up with just random strangers through like a couch surfing website or the like, but people where you have something in common, you have some common values and common interests. And, you know, at least on their end, they're going to feel like they already know us, you know, because we're on here, you know, every week, you know, talking about our, you know, these stories that we have and, you know, basically pouring our hearts out to our fans, right? And showing them the window into our lives. And, you know, and I know pretty well what a lot of my listeners are like as well. I've, you know, formed a lot of relationships with them and talked to several of them and the like. So it's like you have these relationships already, and just, you know, what a unique opportunity. I mean, people have been doing this sort of thing, hitchhiking across Europe, backpacking across Europe, or, you know, the United States, or, you know, pick your country. That's, you didn't invent this. People have been doing this for a long time, but now there are tools to do it where you can have a network ahead of time. You can, you know, it's so easy. It's almost free. Well, actually, I think you probably could do a podcast for free, depending on what sites you use. Where, you know, you can put yourself out there, people get to know who you are, and then you can go out and meet up with these people who are fans of you, who are interested in the same things you are, who, you know, have a lot of in common. So that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, and that's one of the many, many benefits of having an online presence. So anybody listening, get started on that, because it's just so valuable for so many reasons, and this is one of them, and you can do it for free.
Yeah, and also it would be a way to build up your reputation for people. Maybe if they're not fans of your podcast, but if you're looking to stay on someone's couch, you could say, look, I have an online presence. This is who I am. I'm a trustworthy individual. I'm not somebody that's, you know, going to rob you or anything like that. You know what I mean? So it does help, I think, with having that online presence helps with your reputation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had this when I was hitchhiking after I started the podcast, and I mentioned the fact that I have a podcast where I talk about things like this. If people ease up, they feel a lot more comfortable with that. You're not some crazy stranger, but you're actually, I guess, just saying that adds to your trustworthiness.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my final question is, when's the next trip? I
don't know, but I'll keep you updated. It's definitely coming.
Right. Yeah, if you're ever lacking for content for your podcast, for your vlog on YouTube, I can't think of a much better way to generate content.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, great. So if the listeners would like to hear some more from you, what's the best way to do that?
So if listeners want to learn more, my podcast website is valiantgrowth.com. And since I do a lot of frugality, I had an episode about the whole story. And I think the best place to go, I'm going to give some relevant episodes for people. So if you want to hear just my solo version of what I did, a little bit more about how I did it, you can go to episode 32 of Valiant Growth, which is just the story. And then I also recommend listening to the Radical Personal Finance interview that you've mentioned, Chris, and maybe you can put it in the show notes. That one, we go into a lot of detail on tactics, and the host of Radical Personal Finance, Joshua, is also an experienced traveler, and he has some things that I didn't know. So that's very useful if you actually want to learn how to do it. And then finally, I've interviewed somebody who cycled through Europe with a tent and asked to put that tent up in people's homes in their backyards. And that is in many ways an interesting alternative strategy that is superior in some ways. So that's episode 48. And I wonder, Chris, have you interviewed other people who are travelers like this?
Not exactly the same scenario, but so I've had on a couple times Lainey Liberty and her son Miro, and they've backpacked across South America, and their budget is very small. She runs a online business where I think she said she just needs to generate about $1,000 a month from her online business. and their expenses are all covered. You know, I do think they stay in hotels or hostels and things like that, but they have all their possessions fit in their backpack, and they go to a place, stay there for as long as they feel like staying there, and then move on to the next. Last I checked, she had been doing it for years. I think she started when her son was like 9 years old, and he's like 16 now or something like that. So, and they're just perpetual travelers. They've never gone back. You know, before that, they were living in LA, and I think she was an executive, or at least a businesswoman. And, you know, she sold her possessions, and, you know, is now, you know, very, very similar kind of story in some ways, you know, different in others, but really, really interesting life. But I think that's it though. That would, as far as frugally traveling, I've had other people that were travelers, not so frugal. Like I did a great, 2-part series with Eric Townsend that, where he traveled the world, but, definitely not in a frugal manner. And he's got the money to spend for it. He's a hedge fund manager and the like, but definitely some other travel shows on Choice Conversations that I can link to. But the big frugal traveler was Lainey Liberty.
So yeah, plenty of resources. Whichever angle appealed to you, you can keep going and learn some more.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Philip. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to come to Choice Conversations again. It was, I enjoyed that talk.
All right. Take care. All right, gang. I hope you enjoyed that. Such a fun topic. Such an uplifting topic. Really, really cool experience. I'm so happy for Philip that he got to experience that, and so grateful that he came on today and shared that with me and with you all. So really, really fun. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on social media, etc. Go to iTunes, give me a rating, leave a review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps out. So I do appreciate it. All right, folks. Have a great day. Or not. The choice is yours.